Good afternoon, everybody. Grace mentioned in her introduction the importance of applying the knowledge derived, the findings of the Victorian Climate Initiative to Victorian water policy and planning, and I've been invited along to talk about just that. The Urban Water Corporations of Victoria have just recently, over the last 12 months, completed their urban water strategies. So I'll talk about how the Victorian Climate Initiative findings have been incorporated into urban water strategies. I'll start just by highlighting the area in which my organisation, Gippsland Water, operates. So we're to the east of Melbourne. The green coloured region shows the towns that we service. The purpley blue area shows the extent of the catchments that supply our systems. We start really, if you're following the Princes Highway at Drouin and go right through to Stratford, extending northwards up towards the Great Divide and southwards to the Strzelecki Ranges. So Victorian Climate Initiative and the guidelines. So how does a water corporation use the Victorian Climate Initiative findings? So a major use, as I just mentioned, is in the 5 yearly urban water strategies. Urban water strategies is basically the new name for what used to be called water supply demand strategies. It's a statement of obligations requirement that urban water corporations do these on a 5 yearly basis. So for this, the department, working with the rest of the Victorian Climate Initiative team, BOM and CSIRO, have compiled a set of guidelines, and these summarise the complex outcomes of the Victorian Climate Initiative research into, I guess, 10 clear recommendations. So that was a great outcome. They were quite easy to follow in that respect. And we've seen that already today. That's the front cover of the guidelines. Okay, so looking at what urban corporate water corporations are here to do, well, we're here to provide a service to our customers, and we have a set of obligations associated with that. Basically, if we're providing a reliable water supply that's safe to drink, and if we're taking away people's wastewater, treating it, disposing of it in a way that's environmentally responsible, we're doing all of that now. And if we're planning so that we continue to do that into the future, well, that's covering off an awful lot of what we're required to do. So when it comes to water resources planning, the level of service criteria relating to customer obligations relates to the reliability of supply. How often is our water supply going to be restricted, and to what degree? And for how long might those restrictions take place? So how reliable should a water system be? Well, that's not something that's set in any statement of obligation or guideline. Instead, water corporations are given the flexibility to work or to engage with their customer base and determine what's an acceptable level of service. So a level of service that is too high might be unaffordable for customers. A level of service that's too low might be unacceptable. So it's about finding that balance. So, and that's a key step in the development of an urban water strategy through the customer engagement process. We've set our target at 95% reliability. So in simple terms, what that means is that on average, our water supply systems are planned such that water restrictions would be encountered once every 20 years. So how does climate impact upon the level of service? So I guess the key question is, how do we know if our systems will meet this target, both now and also into the future? So we could look at our historic performance, look back at how reliable have our systems been. Yeah, that's a valuable exercise, but we know that things are changing. So climate's changing, as the two preceding presentations outlined. So some of the findings of the Victorian Climate Initiative around the changing climate is that we're now in a new climate baseline. So 1975 to the present represents the current climate more so than the long-term historic record. There's a possibility of step climate change. The guidelines went over that scenario. It's a useful scenario to test your systems against. It represents this possibility that the climate that we experience now and into the future could be more aligned with the millennium drought and the years that followed. And then there's also the ongoing gradual climate change that is superimposed upon the new baseline. So infrastructure and entitlement changes. So if we look back at our historic performance, that might not be a good indication of our future performance because our water entitlements might be different. We might have built new things, or we might not have some of the infrastructure that we once had if things have been decommissioned. So changing demand levels impact upon system performance. And so really what you need is a water model. So I've just put together a picture of a really basic water model. So here we have a dam. We have a pipeline going from our dam to our town and industry. We have inflows coming into the dam. And it's important to recognise too that we don't necessarily get all of those inflows. Rules exist in the form of our entitlements that say that dictate what we must pass to the river downstream for other uses, agricultural, environmental, etc. And there's constraints in terms of our infrastructure, such as how much water can go down that pipe each day, things like that. How big is that reservoir? So I won't dwell too much on most of the aspects of a water model, but what is important and relevant for today is what should we use for the inflows? That's a key variable. So the most significant use of the Victorian Climate Initiative findings is in developing appropriate inflow scenarios to use for that modelling work. So we use the 10 recommendations in the guidelines, and we can use those recommendations and their advice in order to adjust our historic stream flow records to reflect a range of possible climate scenarios. So we don't know which climate outcome is going to be the one that we'll get. We saw in the preceding presentations there's 42 models all saying slightly different things, so there's a range of possible outcomes. So we've got the current climate baseline. We can use the guidelines advice to modify our long-term historic record to reflect that current climate baseline. We can apply the 3 gradual long-term future climate scenarios, the low, the medium and the high Francis talked about, to make further adjustments to that long-term stream flow record. And we can also apply the step climate change scenario to the stream flow record. Now, the reason that we adjust a historic record using the guidelines recommended approaches is so that we retain the natural variability that's inherent in our historic records. So the earlier presentations talked about both variability and climate change. So we've got a lot of useful information already embedded in our long-term historic records around variability, but we need to be mindful that climate change will perhaps superimpose upon that, and so it's about taking the long-term historic record and adjusting that interannual variability such that it reflects a future climate. So here's a plot of one of our streamflow long-term records, and I'm not sure how easily people can see this, but there are a series of blue columns and a series of pink columns. So the blue columns are our long-term historic record, and you can see that in general they're higher than the pink columns. However, from 1975 onwards, they both align. So that's the current baseline period. All the years preceding 1975 have been scaled. So we retain that variability, but we've scaled that inflow scenario so that it reflects the current baseline. So water model results. So we run the model and we run it for the full historic record period with the adjustments having been done to the inflow file, and we use the model to test the system for reliability. So did our customers get restricted in the model run? And if so, how often were they restricted? How severe were those restrictions? And for how long? And does that match up with the target level of service that we're trying to provide? Might it fail now? Might it fail into the future to provide that target level of service? And that enables us to determine if we need to do something. Do we need to augment supply? Do we need to implement initiatives to manage demand? Those sorts of things. So I've just put up a plot. This is taken from our urban water strategy that's on our website. This is for Gippsland Water's Latrobe system. The Latrobe system includes the Moondara Reservoir on the Tyers River, Gippsland Water's share of the Blue Rock Reservoir on the Tangell River, and also some other tributaries. And it supplies townships in the Latrobe Valley area, Moe, Morwell, Traralgon and outlying towns, as well as some major industry. The green lines represent historic demand and future demand scenarios. Uncertainty in demand, just like uncertainty in supply, leads us to present a range of outcomes. What the blue lines represent is yield. Yield, best way to think of yield is a cap on demand. If demand goes higher than yield, then we're not meeting our level of service. So this shows the low climate change outlook, the medium climate change outlook, the high climate change outlook, all coming off the back of the current baseline yield, as well as the step climate change outlook. And you can see here that the system's forecast to be relatively secure for the long term, out to 50 years, for all of the scenarios, except in the case we get that dry 10th percentile climate change outcome. So just Gippsland Water, and I'm sure I'm speaking for the other urban water corporations, we'd like to acknowledge the significant and important work undertaken by the whole Vicky team in supporting the water industry. The ongoing review of climatic and hydrologic scientific developments and most importantly, their translation into useful, easy to use guidance for water corporations helps us to meet those customer obligations I mentioned before. So yes, thank you.